All right, hello, and welcome to another pod practice episode. We are excited to welcome onto the show Chris Bubernak, former Colorado Mama Bird player and now resident in Seattle. Also working for the Boston Celtics, doing data analytics. Today is an exciting episode talking about ultimate data, stats, and the NBA. Note that some of the podcast had to be edited out due to the fact that Chris may get fired if it was released to the public. Chris, thank you for joining us. I hope you guys enjoy the pod.
Now, dear friends, welcome Chris Bubernak. All right. Welcome to Pod Practice, a show about ultimate life and the NBA. From a coach and player perspective, we are your hosts. I'm Coach Mike. This is Alex Atkins and Quinn Feiner. Today, we're joined by one of the most interesting Mama Bird alumni that I know. He's worked for Microsoft, Google, and now is on Brad Stevens and Mike Zarin's speed dial as the czar of analytics for the Boston Celtics.
Thank you, Mike, for that introduction. I think that might be a little selling me a little
No way.
stronger than I the sway that I
know you
currently
play
have.
pickup
I
with.
appreciate it.
I know you play pickup with Brad.
That is true.
It also shows how old Mikey is because he's still talking about speed dial, which is interesting.
Yes.
But anyway, we're happy to have you on the pod, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Happy to be here. This is as I was saying before, never been on a podcast before, so this is very exciting for me personally. Definitely a life accomplishment.
Let's go. Well, we're happy to pop that cherry with you.
I'd love to get into some sort of NBA questions, stat questions, analysis stuff.
Yeah, are you a fan of the Celtics, Chris? Now or
now? Yes, I would say I'm a fan of winning. And I still I grew up in
5 and 5
Colorado.
in the last 10. What's up with that?
Oof.
Look, it's trust the process.
No, you guys can't trust the process. That's our thing.
Oh my God, you're not a Philly fan, are you?
I was waiting to drop that. That might be my Kins bomb coming out early.
Oh God. So I am like professionally a Celtics fan, but growing up in Colorado, I'm also like a big Nuggets fan, and it works out very nicely because the only situation where they'd ever play each other in a meaningful game is if both of them are in the finals, which at that point it's gravy. But rooting for both of those teams, I have a real hatred for the 76ers.
That's okay. No one likes us. We don't care.
There's a reason for that
too. If the Celtics win, you get a ring though, right?
Yeah, that is true. And like I was mentioning before, in college, when 2011, when I was playing for Bird, we lost in the semis to Wisconsin, so we came 2 games short of winning a championship. This past NBA season, we won 2 games in the NBA Finals. So once again, 2 games short of winning a championship. And so I feel a little cursed at the moment, but we'll see.
I have an anecdote about the ring thing. Sandy Brown on Bravo. He worked for the Avs for I think like 6 or 7 years, and they won this past year. And he got his ring like I think a couple of weeks ago, and he had he got a ring, and it looks so sick, and I'm super jealous. But he quit the company like I think like a month before. And they still sent it to him, which he was like really worried. But I was like, why didn't you just stay a little bit longer? And he's like, I had to get out. But he got a ring, so that's pretty sick.
Wow, that would really be crushing
if they didn't
to
send
leave
it
right before that. I mean, especially again, like to parallel for me. I mean, I graduated Colorado in 2013, and then of course in 2014, won the championship. So yeah.
Like I guess I want to ask you a bunch of stuff about basketball. We're really curious, but also like how it can relate to Ultimate. What are we missing in Ultimate? You touched on some of this when we last spoke. I'm trying to figure out where's the best place to start. Um,
I can try and ask myself a question if you want, and you can tell me if it's a
yeah,
good question
yeah,
or not, because it's something that people ask me like currently, which is, hey Chris, now that you have this fancy job where you work on all these numbers and stuff and help basketball teams like try and be good at basketball, like what can we do for Frisbee, or like how
yeah.
how can we make this happen for Frisbee? And the thing that I always go back to is that uh, it's really freaking hard to do for Frisbee, and I'll explain why. So like doing a little basketball nerd stuff here, the at like a base level, what we're trying to do is like after a game happens, try and figure out like based on how we played and the shots we got and all of the things that happened during the game, like do we think our process was good in that game and produced like good shots and kind of good things that maybe just didn't bounce our way? Do we think we got lucky? We're like trying to figure out like, should we keep doing the things we did or should we adjust things? And the way that most teams have decided to go about doing this is you try and figure out like how many points you think you should have scored based off of your shots, and you build what we call like a shot model that tries to predict based on the shooter, based on the location, based on the defense, like what is the odds that shot goes in, and then you kind of sum it up over all the shots you take. So that's like at a very basic level. And so people have asked like, well, if you're going to do something for Frisbee, like how would you do something like that? And the tricky part with Frisbee is that one, for starters, we just
No
don't have
data.
this data. We
Yeah.
have some XY data for the ADL, but that is only telling you where the throw started from and like where the throw ended up, which is getting you part of the way there. But we don't know where any of the defenders are. We don't know where any of the other players are. And if you think about like if you were trying to guess like the probability of a throw working, you would want to know all of those things. Um,
Yeah.
and then we have the single biggest factor, which is the wind. Like anyone that has
Mm.
played Frisbee before knows that like if somebody's going to ask you like what are the odds this throw works, the first thing you would think about is like what's the wind? Because if it's a crosswind aside, like any of these different types of things, you don't have that in basketball. You're just in a gym, and so there are less kind of like these crazy effects. And so I personally think that it'd be very hard to do a lot of things in Frisbee analytics without knowing like detailed wind information and then also like where everyone is on the field. And until we have that kind of information, a lot of like the really advanced stuff that you see in basketball and you see in baseball and you see in even like soccer nowadays, it's just really hard to do for Frisbee.
That's kind of a bummer.
Huge,
Well,
huge bummer.
huge bummer for sure. All right, well, Chris, then if if I were to put you in charge of, kind of doing a similar job, but maybe for the whole ADL or something like that, like where would you start? Where would you begin? What kind of data would you want to start accumulating, those kind of things?
That is a great question. So the thing that I think, so ignoring wind for a second because that's just kind of hard. And again, I want to preface all this by saying that like there are people that know much more about stats than me, so the people might listen to this and be like, "Chris is an idiot," and like you could do this, that. So I just would like to add that
No, you
caveat
are the
that
czar.
I am by no means the expert of experts here. Uh, that being said, I think the biggest thing would be either have players wear like something that tracks where they are on the field
Mm-hmm.
at all times, or pay people to, in the same way that like we have stat keepers keep track of like where throws happen and stuff like that, pay people to go through the footage and like mark where players are. That seems really annoying,
So
but
in addition to just what the current stat does, current statisticians do
yeah.
really review. Okay.
Yeah, you'd have to I think do it sort of in a reviewed kind of sense where you go back through and track where somebody is at all points, or at least when a throw goes up, like a freeze frame of like where kind of people are, because it's really hard to do like so much of the to backtrack real quick. there's one, we want to know like the probability of like, is a throw going to work? And then the other thing is like trying to ascertain like value from a throw. Like a throw into the end zone is obviously ideal, but like maybe a swing throw is really good if it switches the field and now there's no one in front of you. But like a swing throw to just put the disc in front of 5 defenders is not useful. And so when trying to like say, so like one of the things people always want to do with sports analytics is say, how useful are players or what kind of value do they provide? And you would want to be able to say like, hey, this thrower is like throwing all these throws that like maybe they're not goals, but they're like setting up goals, or they're setting up the setup for a goal, and understanding like, hey, they moved the disc from a bad location to like a really good location is like a useful thing. And then it's like, if they did that on a what we think is a really high difficulty throw, then it's like players doing that are super valuable. For example,
Are we talking impact score? Is that what you're
yeah,
talking?
I mean, you could call it whatever you want, but yeah, roughly like when people talk about it, they call it like impact score, or like I don't even know what else, like win probability added or something like that. But yeah, it's trying to measure your impact on winning the game in whatever game that is by like how many goals you are sort of accounting for your team relative to how many goals you're like giving up for your team.
Yeah. So I know last year during the playoffs we had at least one or two players wear a vest.
Yeah, I
Do you remember
think
this, Quinn?
Buck and one other person wore. It was just like a heart rate monitor. It wasn't a heart rate monitor, but that's basically what it looked like, and it tracked. I think it just tracked their speed, though. I don't think it tracked their location. I just think it was tracking how fast they were going.
That technology has to
So yeah, it
exist,
has to be
right?
pretty.
I
I
don't
was
know.
thinking like if there's already drone footage in Frisbee, if we could get a drone, if everybody's wearing these tracking devices and we could get a drone that was a top-down view of the entire field, that could be a good way to go back through the footage and find out where everybody is. But Frisbee's just not there yet, probably.
Or potentially like I don't know, like GPS locators under each pylon with that, like the relative position plus something on the disc itself.
There's probably somebody with an engineering background that could tell you the best way to do something like this. But like all that being said, I have some more, or I guess another downer opinion about this, which is that you could put all this time into like Frisbee analytics and trying to figure out the best, rating players and strategies and stuff like that. But to be honest, I think that we are still like so far away from like people should just throw more, and like that's still the
we're just too nascent as a sport. We don't have enough skill.
Yeah, like if I was running like an ADL team and they were like, you can have all this money, do you want to spend it on like drones and analytics and stuff, or do you want to spend it on like, I don't know, trainers and nutrition and like paying players so that they don't have to work jobs and they can just like play Frisbee all day? I think we're sadly still, as like a numbers person, it kills me to say this, but
yeah,
I think we're still a ways away from, at least like I think there are, and we can talk about some of this stuff later. I think there are high level things that we can take away from the numbers, but I think trying to do sort of impact analysis of like individual players and stuff like that at a level where you would feel like confident with it, I think there's just so much data that that just doesn't exist.
Yeah,
I do think probably the single most important piece of data that like you just brought up was like it's like the hockey assist, but sometimes it's not a hockey assist. It's that like high dangerous pass that you're completing. And I'm a hockey guy, so I watch a lot of NHL, and they have like wins above replacement and all that for the players, and it's a big part of that is the high dangerous plays that they create for the defense. And if we could just get that in Frisbee, I think that would be massive, because that would show a lot more than just like the goals and the assists. Usually that's like something has broken into that goal or something has broken into that assist, and it's like a dish or something and they caught a 2-yard clap catch. What was the high dangerous play that led to that is, I think, the most important thing or the most interesting thing that I would like to see. and who knows how we track that, like we were saying, but that's where I'm.
I don't know if y'all are familiar with this, but the Boston Glory, the UDL team, they started doing some analytics stuff and ran like some competition basically where they had a bunch of data that had all of the stuff that the AUDL provides. So that's like the XY data, the thrower, the score of the game, the time of the game, all that stuff. But they actually paid people to go through and like add extra stuff like was it a forehand? Was it a backhand? Was there a mark on them? Was the receiver covered? Was it tight coverage? Et cetera, et cetera. And so there was a number of things that they added there. You know, they paid people to tag these things, but like just knowing was it a break throw, for example, I think starts to get to Quinn what you were saying about like useful throws are like, you know, a break throw generally is breaking down the defense in some way that's like advantageous. And so like who are the players that are just throwing open side throws versus like who is throwing big like break side gainers, stuff like that. So I think with some relatively small amount of like manual intervention, you can start to get to some like useful stuff that is definitely it's definitely like better than what currently exists, but it's a long ways away from what you know somebody would say is like mathematically rigorous maybe.
That's useful though, and at least as a coach, if I'm watching film, I can think about what I want to pick out from any given player.
Do you, Mikey? Do you know what our stat guy for Summit does? Sam, shout out Sam. I know he goes back through the games. Do you think he's just doing like goals and assists, making sure those are correct and checking yards ish?
Yes. So he corrects himself. I think he can mark. There's like in the app they can mark times live to sort of know to give them a sense of when to look back. But it's exactly what Chris was describing. So where a pass was received and where the completion happened or where that disc landed.
I guess that also really goes to Chris's point about how it's not the most valuable thing to be putting time into because the Glory did all that and look where it got them. I mean, I would be so pissed if I was one of those people going through all that just to watch my team shit the bed every game. I mean, that's fucking ridiculous.
To be fair, I believe all the data competitions have happened after the season, so it's getting right current season.
So Chris Baum, the Glory are going to be fucking amazing this year because of
they're gonna have all the stats.
It's unclear to me again how I still like. Okay, so the way that I think about this is when I showed up to Colorado, you know, the ethos was like we're gonna work harder than everyone else. We're gonna train harder. Not necessarily smart strategy. It was just like you win your matchups, and that's it. And like we on offense we're gonna huck it, and we're just gonna be bigger, stronger, and faster than everyone, and like get the ball. And you know the belief was it was kind of easy to buy into because it was just like you don't need to focus on anything but like lifting and getting stronger and all these things, and like you'd feel good because you'd be like, you know, we're doing all this stuff and these other teams like they're just kind of like playing Frisbee where we're training like real athletes out here. And then what you realize is that yeah, you know, there are some like big gains you get at the beginning of this where it's like if you've never lifted before like me, then you get much faster in the beginning. Yeah. But then if you're taking all these people that have been lifting for a while, the gains you're getting from lifting all the time are pretty marginal versus just like if we had taken all that time and just like I mean, we were throwing a lot, but if we were doing more Frisbee, if we were playing more Frisbee, for example, like we were probably going to get more payoff from something like that. And, you know, looking back, it pains me to say this as someone that is like an advocate of like working out and all this stuff. But at the same time, like when I think about the stats and all that stuff, I think there are definitely like high level things you can pull from it. But yeah, if I was running an AUDL team, I would not be spending my money on stats and stuff other than I think it's cool.
What do you think? What do you think would be some of the easiest, like what would be some of the easiest data to collect then that you wouldn't have to put that much time or money into that you think maybe isn't being collected now, but could? And so maybe you think about like what's the easiest stuff to collect in the NBA, and this could be offensively or defensively as well. Easy data that's collected that you actually think is very beneficial. and doesn't require a lot of technology or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, so I think going back, I think one of the easy ones is just like counting break throws. I think that, I mean, with that, the problem is there hasn't been too much analysis of like Frisbee data. But it seems like if you just look at all the stats that exist, and we're trying to understand like who good throwers are and who is effective and like what, I don't know, like I think just an easy thing would be for every throw knowing whether or not it was a break or not. It seems useful. I can't entirely say why it would be the most useful thing, but it definitely seems like it would be useful.
I think that'd be huge. Just seeing if it was a break, and then seeing how many yards were gained off of that break as well. We talked about this last podcast, but if the break is like a swing or if it's a soft break out wide, it's not going to gain you as much as a break that cuts the defense pretty far upfield and they can't contain it as well. So if it's a break that's like 12 yards or 15 yards, something like that, that's probably going to show.
Yeah, this is interesting though, because sort of what Chris was talking about, it does depend on where the other players
True.
are, right? Like if it's a soft break out wide and there's nobody else in front of that player, then maybe it is very valuable. But no, I see what you're saying, because like that one type of break throw is definitely a higher degree of difficulty, and if you're completing that at a high rate, then you're probably more valuable as a thrower.
But you start getting into now we start getting into this whole very interesting discussion, which is actually one of the parallels between basketball and Frisbee I started thinking about a lot, which is, so if I was coaching Frisbee, I actually don't know how much time I would spend trying to get my team to throw a lot of really hard breaks. Because while I think talented throwers can throw really tough breaks, I think that if you're playing offense well, you should be trying to not you should be trying
Throw
to get the
difficult
ball to the
things.
break space without throwing where your mark is, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean that's very much true of like we definitely try to work towards both sides of the fields with our legs, and the space that we try to attack is generally not high degree of difficulty to place the disc. But it's interesting to think about the different types of players that, like, as we develop these systems team wide, the maybe the downside is we don't always work on that skill, and then all of a sudden we run into a team, or like we talk about Nethercut a lot as a thrower, like his skill set, his superpower, like he can just in one throw completely flip the field. Where like a lot of our players, even though they may have the talent to do so, or the skill set, or like the ability within them to get there, we don't necessarily develop that enough.
Yeah.
Bob talks about that break you were talking about all the time, Chris, that like it's like a horizontal cut across the field, and it's like basically not even a break throw. You're like just like throwing it pretty straight, but the receiver's trajectory carries them to the break side. The momentum carries them there. Yes. And then that next throw can be a break as well, but the mark isn't going to be there. So it's a huge break, but there's no mark. So it's easy.
Yeah. There's this funny thing where whenever we do like your standard break mark cutting drill, one of the things that I feel like this phase that players go through is they'll be doing that drill and they'll realize, hey, if I just throw it earlier, I basically am not breaking the mark in this drill. And they'll start throwing it like earlier and earlier. And players, maybe more veteran players, will be like, hey, you're breaking the drill. Like you're supposed to be breaking the mark here. And when you throw it that early, it's basically an open side throw, which is like, yeah, I get what they're saying. For learning how to throw, you should probably be trying to challenge yourself. But at the same time, it's kind of this genius concept where it's, you are throwing a throw that is making it to the break side basically without having to deal with a mark, which is, if I was trying to win, I would probably want my players to do that instead of
throw easier things.
Throw easier throws. And to bring this to basketball for a second, / take a shot at Kins here and his idol, Joel Embiid. One of the things we talk about all the time is like in basketball world is there's this huge debate between like Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid. This is a battle, as
this
no
topic
debate.
For the
ages.
Jokic. No debate, exactly. And if you look at like all of these, like if you watch the two of them play, you think to yourself like Joel is clearly better. Like look at all the shots that he can make.
Of
He's
course.
falling over. He's spinning. He's hitting the mid range. He's dunking on people. He's doing all this stuff.
Right.
And you look at his shot chart, and it's just like all over the place. He can score from anywhere on the court. It's incredible. And you look at Jokic, and it's just like he's basically just shooting layups and then occasionally
And
threes.
he's just padding his
And
stats.
he's padding stats, yes, as people say. And it's this like fundamental argument of like, people are saying, well, Jokic only takes easy shots, and that's why he makes more of them. But at the end of the day, if the point is to like, score and score with efficiency, Jokic is in effect being more impactful, even if he is not like as talented of a player. And I think this is like one of the things that people get so wrapped around in both basketball but ultimate. I have a friend of mine who always like, well, if we have these 7 players, they'll always beat these other 7 players because like individually each of them is better. And it's like, yeah, maybe, but if they all do dumb stuff on the field, like it doesn't matter how good their breakthroughs are or if they all have like sweet hucks. It sort of depends like what you actually do on the field and like what level of difficulty you set up for yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
But all that being said, again, to go back to basketball, if the shot clock's running down and the game's on the line and you need like someone to make a hard shot, like being able to have tough shot makers, being able to have someone like Nethercut that can like bail you out or like make that is
like Kevin Durant.
Important. Yeah, or Kevin Durant.
Jason Tatum.
Or Jason Tatum. And so you almost want to have this like perfect scenario where your players, or both in Frisbee or basketball, shoot high percentage or take high percentage looks all of the time, but then have practiced enough the low percentage ones that when they need to pull those out and kind of like fall back on a really tough breakthrough, they can do it.
Is there a way that you can put this into words to like distill it down for an ultimate player, for like a younger player, maybe somebody that's just trying to improve? Like maybe they're a talented thrower, but they turn it over a lot, or maybe they are feeling maybe they're a less talented player at this time and are trying to figure out how to have an impact on the game. Like, could you distill that down like for like a mindset?
This is sort of related, and it's kind of a philosophy that I've stolen from someone. I can't remember who, but it's this idea of like there was always going to be like a next throw, and basically you kind of go through whatever offense you're playing. You get the disc, and you're always looking to throw it to the most dangerous place. So normally maybe you start with the break side and kind of go through your progressions through to the open side. But the idea is that like you never want to feel like there's no throw that you like have to have. Like you always want this idea that like I'm only taking a throw that I think is going to work. And if I don't think it's going to work, like I don't, there's no throw that you need. And feeling like you always are going to have a set of throws to go through and always be able to end with like a dump or a reset or something like that. And on some team that I played on at one of the iterations of Voodoo/ECU, we had this kind of thing, which was just like anytime somebody had maybe a turnover where they were trying to do something a little outside of the system or a little too aggressive, it was just this reminder of like, hey, just remember, like we don't need that throw. There's no throw that we need. And so kind of just trying to internalize that.
Yeah. I can think of a lot of players that would stand to gain a lot if they could just lock that mentality into their brains.
I've got one, coaching. But I'm not also not going to say.
I mean, I think I've had to like I find that balance. I think especially like you work on a lot of different throws. You have a lot of different throws in your repertoire. You want to show them off. You want to make those difficult throws. Mm-hmm. It's cool. It's fun. It's a highlight and whatever. But, ultimately, like Chris said, if you want to win and be the most efficient that you can be, it's not about making cooler throws. It's about making easier, consistent throws. And that honestly is just like a big mental part of the game,
Yeah, I know you had a big breakthrough after we lost to Dark Side in semis. One of those nationals, I don't remember. Probably your last year. And actually, if I were to call somebody out, it could be Nut. We basically sing his praises constantly, and I think he would agree with this. Like sometimes he takes a shot that he doesn't need to because he can, and like he's on the field because he can make all these throws, but sometimes we just don't need him to. And as you guys honestly grow, as our team gets better and more experience, we can lean on other people to make some of those
I think there's
throws.
also something to be said about having the confidence to throw those, and if you turn it, you turn it. It's like the dumb Kins Nut confidence that, like, oh, if I turn this,
Shoot or shoot.
oh well, man.
Let's go shoot or shoot.
Oh, okay. There's actually something. This is another good point, which is we were having some discussion with some guys that all played ECU last year, and we were talking about trying to assign value maybe to throwers, and like if you were trying to figure out like who are the most impactful players and kind of attributes of those players. And one of the things somebody said was that, well, I can tell you what is one of the attributes I would avoid, which is like anybody that has like a high turnover rate, because
Mm-hmm.
high turnovers, like elite, especially like elite club levels, will just kill you. And I thought about that for a bit, and I think like on the surface, you definitely don't want people that turn the disc over a lot. But at the same time, imagine a situation where the other team knows that like no one on your team is going to huck it. And so like everyone is just playing under all of the time. And so I think that there is sort of an effect that's hard to measure of like having someone like another cut on the field, having a super aggressive thrower, which is the effect they provide,
Yeah,
where the defense everywhere is like, holy crap,
warps,
it
changes the shape.
changes the shape. Like
Yeah,
now
like
everything is
people talk
live.
about Steph Curry's gravity.
Precisely. And the reason that Steph and Dame and all these guys have gravity, Steph is kind of a bad example because he actually makes a ton of shots at a very high clip. But like there are some guys that would probably be considered like gunners in the NBA that don't, their percentages are not as high as they could be, but by being so kind of free flowing with those shots, they kind of open things up for everyone else. And
Yeah,
so
like some of the data. How do you balance data with culture? Obviously, again, knowing that ultimately we don't have a lot of data. So like thinking about Frisbee, like we have these big rosters, right? Like 25 plus people for tournaments, because basically you would die if you didn't have that many people. Um, and inevitably a good portion of your team oftentimes does not get to play very much. So if you're going with like the premise that you want to play your best players more to give yourself the best chance to win, especially like if the gap between your talent is pretty high. How like maybe the question is, for in this specific situation, the question is, what about the impact on the culture and all those people that aren't playing, if you need buy-in? And in general, maybe a more general question would be, when you're thinking about stats, especially as someone that's you're focused on data, do you even consider that at all?
yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff there. I can I can touch on a couple of the basketball parts of it and then relate it back to Frisbee maybe. The the basketball stuff is interesting because I mean just the dynamics of an NBA player versus a Frisbee player is like, this is one, their livelihood. And so they are, for guys that are maybe not making as much money as other guys, it's like, I want to play because I need to secure another contract, otherwise I'm not getting money. And so there are very very intense feelings about playing time, and I think that's one of the things that kind of from I didn't quite realize from a fan perspective maybe how big of a deal it was. In my head, I was just thinking like, I've played sports my whole life, and like even if I'm not one of the good players on the team, I want to do whatever I can do to help the team win, and just like being a part of winning is great. And then you realize that like, some guy who's the ninth or 10th man on the Celtics, who's maybe kind of good and is not playing as much as they think they should, they are not happy about the situation at all, because like, yeah, winning a championship is great, but they don't want to have a job after the NBA. Like they want to retire, and the only way they're going to get to do that is by getting a contract, not winning a championship and getting
Hmm.
a ring. And so the financial aspect of it is definitely a very large component when it comes to talking to people. Like getting people to buy into a Frisbee team, I thought was very hard until I was part of a basketball team and then
Really?
realized there's a whole nother level to that kind of buy-in. Unless you're dealing with a bunch of veterans that have already kind of made their money and are there for a ring, um, you're dealing with people. You're basically, asking people to take a lot less salary, and it's really tough.
Yeah. Wow. I never thought about that.
Yeah, it's it makes the issues that we deal with in Frisbee seem much smaller. But to your point about Frisbee and kind of relating it back to, thinking about playing time is something that I've had to deal with a bunch, and I mean, both as a player where I've been on the bottom of a roster, I've been on the top of a roster, I've been a captain for a team. I guess I've only like very very briefly coached, but I've definitely been both the recipient of lots of playing time and no playing time, and then also the person having to like give people no
Mm-hmm.
playing time or lots of playing time. And um, the biggest thing that I've kind of learned is making sure that everyone, even if they're not playing, has sort of like a role or something that keeps them bought into the team. And so like I'll give an example. Like I know when I was not getting a lot of PT on Bird initially, the thing that I would think about that like got me motivated to like go to these tournaments and like play was I knew that before every single game we were gonna like go through sets or go through like oversteer or do something. And I was like, I need to play as hard as I possibly can during this so that, guys are like ramped up and like ready to go. And like
Yeah.
that was kind of just like a little thing that I like took pride in. It was like, hey, like, if we were going out there and we're running offense, like I'm going to try and get everyone up to game speed. Um
Is that something? Is that a realization that you came to on your own, or who was Jim coaching back then? Did he instill
Jim
that?
Jim was coaching. To be honest, I can't remember where it came from specifically. Again, for me, it's always been that like I think that I don't have like a ton of natural talent in anything in both hand-eye coordination, physical talent, etc. And so like whenever I wanted to like get good at something, I always had to start at the bottom and I always had to try so hard to get there. And so it was just like fighting and scrapping for every minute of playing time, any bit of anything that I could get. And so it was like, hey, if I can contribute in like some way, like I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
And there were definitely guys that sort of I think created that culture. Like I don't want to say like I just showed up and it was like, hey, I'm gonna work hard and everyone else is gonna do that too. Like it definitely was there and I benefited from that. Um but I think the realization that has come to me maybe later on is that, some people can kind of create that self motivation and some people sort of need to like be given it or like sort of assigned
Yeah.
things maybe.
So you do think that the older players did have that in them, but you may have also had that naturally.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to describe it. And then
And if you don't have it naturally, it's pretty important for your leaders to be able to exhibit those
yeah,
qualities.
definitely. And one of the things that I was going to try and tie this back to playing time a little bit, which is, if I were to maybe if I was again running a team and I were going to try some radical things to like, work within the constraints of having these large rosters while also trying to like put the most effective teams out there. I think like one thing that I would find interesting is potentially doing things like, instead of trying to get all your players playing time in every game, maybe for some of the guys that are sort of at the bottom of the roster, say like, okay, for game one today, you two players are going to be like mixed into our regular rotation, and you five people, you're just like, don't even cleat up, like you're going to be, I mean, cleat up, but like you're not going to play in this game, and kind of rotating in players for like specific games and being like, in this game, you're going to have a big role, and so that they know which ones to kind of like get up for and which
Yeah.
ones that they can kind of, to not expect as much.
Yeah. Yeah, I've thought about things like that too. I wonder if in practice it could work. It has for the AUDL at times when we have our road trips, especially because um, we might bring 22 players and just tell two of them, "Hey, you're playing the Salt Lake game," and the other two, you're playing the Oakland game on like a back to back. I want to ask you about like the inverted pivot
Mm,
and the out of bounds pulls versus the brick mark. So these are some things that you have some data on, I think, right?
yeah. Yeah, I can talk briefly. I'll give like a quick explainer, which is that
Yeah. What is the inverted pivot?
well, okay, so the as a tactic or as a website?
Let's start with tactic, but I
As
do
a
want to plug
tactic.
your website a little bit. Although
Oh,
I
I
kind of want to keep it secret for myself. And
okay, yeah. Then we won't talk about that. We'll keep that
okay,
secret.
okay,
Uh, the tactic, the inverted pivot. So this is not something that I came up with, and I will preface this by saying that the place that I got this from is not a source of information that I would use for many things in life. But there is a there is a online person named Frank who has a lot of interesting theories about things. Some that he came up
Huguenard.
with or allegedly came up with, and some that are, I think, I don't know, that have just sort of arisen. But he maybe coined the name for this concept of inverting your pivot, which is basically just if you think about the way you normally run kind of like a traditional out and undercut, you catch it on the sideline and then people always pivot to to the sideline and then upfield, if that makes sense. So like if you imagine catching an under on the flick side from a right-handed thrower and you kind of catch it near the sideline, people always pivot to the sideline first and then upfield to kind of throw that continue. And the concept of the inverted pivot is basically just immediately turning to the middle of the field first and then kind of going through your progressions from there to upfield. And the idea behind it is basically that when in the traditional pivoting, you're spending half of your time where you could be kind of like picking up information with your eyes, staring out of bounds where there's no one. And the best outcome is basically you spin around, and when you are looking upfield, you've perfectly timed this up, and there's a continue going downfield. And anyways, I heard about this idea, and I started just kind of like doing it at pickup and in practice and stuff like that. And I found that it kind of just worked in a weird way. Like my mark was always flying by me.
Yeah.
I was able to like dish it back to the middle of the field and like get a series of like give and goes going, like a bunch of random stuff. And it's like one of those. It's not like a thing that I think like I'm not going to say you need to do it all the time, but it was just like a super interesting tactic that I felt like no one had ever taught me or anything like that. And like maybe I'd be curious if you all have like thought consciously about this before, or maybe
Yeah.
unconsciously done stuff like this.
I mean,
But
Truck kind of did that with their offense this last year. Like, it wasn't that exactly, but if they caught the disc on the sideline, they were squaring up to the middle of the field almost instantly. And I kind of like that. Like, if you catch it on the sideline, we don't really need much upfield. We kind of just want it back in the middle, in my opinion. So I think there is something to it.
Yeah. And then you think about the buzz bullets. I think they're the most classic example of doing this. And they look to attack, attack, attack. They're like ripping, like to what's his name? Arakawa, the 24, that speedster guy, and other guys. But I love watching them play. They throw with a ton of edge, but they're so precise about. They do always that inverted pivot, and they always have a deep cutter that just turns to the far cone, often for a goal.
Especially like we talked about in the last podcast, how and this kind of relates because it was a stat that you're just way more likely to turn it over from the sideline. And so when you look at it that way, your primary focus once you get it to the sideline, in my opinion, should just be to get it off as quickly as possible, not like advance the disc down the sideline. Like ideally, you just want to get it back to the middle as quickly as possible, which I think would be a really, I mean, like even that, like thinking about all these different stats that you could take, like how many times you throw it to the sideline or how many times you like throw it off the sideline, or even like how long someone holds the disc would be a really interesting stat. Like total average time of disc in hand would be a really interesting stat to keep for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's interesting. So a lot of this, the stuff about like keeping the disc on the sideline is kind of, at least using the rudimentary data that we have from the ADL. Some of the most like interesting stuff that I think I've been able to learn. Maybe it's not like none of it is revolutionary. It's like, yeah, you don't want the disc on the sideline. Half the field is cut off there. Um, but I think when I looked at it before, depending on what measurement you use for like close to the sideline, whether or not you say like 10 yards or 15 yards, it's something like 5% of throws normally are turnovers. But if you're on the sideline, it's like 10% of throws. And so just like with that, like, piece of information in the back of your head, you're like, yeah, why would I spend more time on the sideline ever? Now I say all this, and I know that you all played or play a bunch of defenses that are all like FM, right? And so you're always pushing the disc to the middle of the field, which is, again, like I don't know how to square something like that, which is that throws on the sideline are bad, but also apparently the most effective club defense is always pushing everything right back to the middle, which is in theory where the best throws should happen.
So in theory, I think FM is pushing the disc back to the middle, but I think the core of it is making. I think my Google Home just went off, but in the core of it is making the disc on, like having the player on the sideline with the disc, making that the most difficult spot on the field, and defending the middle with your downfield. It's not really like, yes, we're pushing it back, but you're making the sideline the most difficult place on the field is kind of the way I look at it.
Yeah, we are still trying to like really shrink the field, even though, we are technically forcing back to the middle, but the idea is to really clamp down everything else. And we've touched on this before too, just making sure that the mark has as much impact on the thrower as possible. Because what you will see is a lot of teams are pretty good at getting up line, getting power position, and things like that. And if a team's not going flat, at least for a second, any middle of the road club player has that 30 to 40 yard away shot that is really easy to complete, and it's sort of silly to watch on film have the guy closest to the disc doing nothing at all to impact that outcome, and then just see we have a lot of clips pulled, TK pulled from the truck stop pony game, where like truck stop is just sending these nice smooth easy, like almost as if you're just at the park, soft forehands for goals against ponies, huge athletic super fast defenders, when like these are the best, most athletic defenders in the world and are not having any impact on the outcome of the play.
Mm-hmm.
So the general idea is, have that mark affect what's happening downfield. So what about the out of bounds pull thing? The brick mark. Is that real? That can't be real.
So I think, now we're getting into some of the crazier theories that I don't know if I totally believe in, but if I was coaching a team, I would really give this a whirl. Which is, so I'm going to kind of combine ADL and club here, sort of, because I think there are aspects of it that are interesting. So all this data comes from the ADL, which the ADL is a fundamentally like different game than club frisbee, and to what extent it's different, I don't really know. But I had like gotten all this throw data a while ago, and I sent it out to the people of Reddit, and I said, I don't know what to do with all this. Like, here you guys go. Here's a bunch of stuff I pulled from the ADL website. And somebody asked this question, which was like, um, do pulls matter? Like, can you look at the percentage of score, like the probability of scoring based off of where a possession starts? And it turned out that, like, when I graphed all this, basically, if you get the disc past like midfield, like nothing really matters. Like everything is, the sidelines are a little worse to start than the middle of the field, but for all intents and purposes, like you were it, like really did not matter. And I don't know why this is true, but when I started thinking about it, I have one theory, which is that we've sort of just accepted this thing in Frisbee, which is that the defensive line is just going to run a 70 to start every point,
Mhm.
which is kind of a little insane if you think about it. Like that the defense like literally have to run a sprint. Like if you did this, if you like made your O line run a sprint instead of the D line to start a point, you would be like, why are we doing this? This sucks.
Mhm.
And so with these two pieces of information, the fact that like I don't know why it doesn't seem to matter, and we're also running this unnecessary sprint. I had this thought, which was like, what if we just pull it out of bounds every single time and just walk up the field and set a
Dude, I'm
defense?
I'm so in. That sounds so sick.
You're
With
in.
so this goes against everything again. Like me as a
Yeah, it
player,
doesn't make sense to me.
I,
I mean,
well,
it makes sense from like the fatigue standpoint, and maybe you can set your
'cause
D.
again, you have to. It's not just one sprint you're running, especially over the course of an ADL game. Think about how many defensive points you play.
Yeah,
You're running like 20 extra 70s, which
yeah,
like if you went out and ran 20 70s, like that's a workout. What if you just
that's
didn't run
I
those?
think also if you are fully sprinting down on the pull to stop the first throw per se, if the pull's not amazing, you're sprinting down to stop the
Yep.
first throw that is getting the offense close to the brick mark regardless. And if you're full sprint, you're gonna get beat on the first cut anyway because you're
there's so many ways to
yeah.
beat it too. I mean, Jack Williams has a YouTube video about dominators, and the whole first minute is him countering the movement of the dude just sprinting his ass off down the field, and him
Yeah.
and Jack just doing like a little jog past him, because it's like the classic Kins cut. Get his momentum going in one way and just do the other thing.
So think about this also as like a separate perspective to kind of get at the same idea, which is like the ideal, like it's easiest to play defense when no one is moving. It's
Yeah.
what the defense wants is like total stasis. What the
Yeah.
offense wants is like lots of movement, lots of stuff happening. When you're running down on a pull, everyone is kind of moving around you. Again, like imagine if you could just if you could just choose to say like we would like to just give it to you on the brick mark, and we're just basically going to come out of a timeout every time. So like no one is moving, everyone is totally set. You've communicated all your poaches and your brackets and all of this stuff. Like you were coming from a point where everything is like in this very sterile set
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
I
That's
think
interesting.
the biggest takeaway here is how important the pull is in the, like it's so forgotten because if your puller is ripping huge pulls,
Like
yeah,
CFO or
they're
something.
massive and they're either got a lot of hang time, they're really hard to field. That way your defense is running, let's say, at 70% down and being at least somewhat set before the first throw or at the first throw is essentially the same thing if the pull is massive.
Yeah, so that I never looked at like if like what the success rate is against like individual pullers. So for example, like if you take somebody like Sifo or something, it's like how do teams play against him? Because it's like you watch a club game and you're like, man, or if you're like me and you have to feel these stupid pulls, you're like, this sucks. This is horrible. Um, but I don't actually know what it would be for like if you isolate it to specific pullers or specific hang times. The thing that I looked at was just like location on the field of
Yeah.
where the pull lands.
Yeah.
Can you predict whether or not it's going to be a
Hmm.
goal? And it's
Yeah.
basically like if it's past half field, it's a crapshoot. Like yeah, I think if you could put it in like the back corners of the end zone, then it seemed like it was pretty bad. But it's again, so few people are able to like consistently do that. And so like maybe the takeaway is you
Get
know,
better at
aim
pulling.
aim for back corner, but like be totally okay with throwing it out the back. or
So
throw.
so the ADL now you pull from the brick.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
so
Oh, really?
that's a brand new rule. This will be the first year. So I think that changes things tremendously too, because it makes it easier for pullers to do that or make it huge hang time or something like that. So that
Yeah, I'm really interested.
and then
You should then.
the run
Yeah.
is only what's the run 50 yards then, maybe less, like
Yeah.
so
I mean, I'm still like, it seems like a lot of extra running that just doesn't need to happen. But again, and it pains me to say this as like somebody who's primarily been a defensive player and somebody primarily guarding handlers, is like one of the things that I could always hang my hat
Hang your
on
hat on,
is,
yeah.
yeah, it's just being the first one down in the pool. And it was like, it didn't matter if I was like not good.
You've been
It was
trying
just like,
so hard for nothing all this time.
I mean, 100, like legit, like that's why when I tell people this insane strategy and they're like, you just want to like loaf down on pulls, I'm like, you don't
Oh my
understand.
gosh.
My entire value in Frisbee right now is being the first guy down.
You
And
know,
like,
now that you mention this, I'm thinking about some of the seasons. Like there was a season I played mixed with Love Tractor. I was on the D line, just sprinting my ass off down the field, and I felt so awesome. And then halftime comes, or then Sunday comes, and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I'm
yeah.
cramping on my way down.
So
I can't guard this guy.
I can't say that this was exactly the reason that like led me to this epiphany, but I started wearing, like, my brother, shout out to the NPC, got me he got me actually both brothers, they got me a watch for Christmas one year. And I like wore it to a tournament once, and I had to just like track, what I did for the entire day. And I was partially curious, like, how many miles do you run in a tournament or something? And I'm trying to remember, but I think that on day one of the tournament I ran over 10 miles or something. And I looked at my watch, and it tells you like your recovery for the next day, and it was telling me that I needed to recover for like 60 hours.
Yeah. So Saeed Semrin wore a whoop for it was a fours tournament or a threes tournament, like middle of COVID. And Saeed wore his whoop for it. And I think he ran something like 14 miles, and his strain, I think the whoop maxes out at 21 strain, and his strain was 20.5. And it told him something like he needed to recover for like 4 days straight. But he texted
died.
me after the forest tournament. He's like, dude, my strain's at 20 and a half. I'm like, dude, you have to go for a run. You have to get it to 21. So we had just played Frisbee in the sun. It was like 100 degrees that day. It was awful. And we were so dead. And I'm like, dude, you have to go for a run. And he literally went and jogged for like a mile or 2 miles, and he couldn't get it to 21. And it was just the funniest thing ever.
That is
killed it.
Yeah,
And
I
he
mean,
didn't even get it.
It made me horrified of the effects of a Frisbee tournament on your body. I mean, Mike, you were asking.
I hate tournaments.
Suck.
I mean, I love playing in them, but at the same time, the more I think about it, I'm like, this can't be good.
I think I honestly think they're legitimately dangerous.
Agreed.
Yeah,
for people to be playing. I don't think tournaments are good. I think you should like 4 games in a weekend max, and that's a lot in my opinion. We played 7 last weekend.
Fuck. God.
Yeah, it's a lot. The last thing I was going to say to this whole revolution of pulling out of bounds intentionally or semi-intentionally is, in the ADL, I think that one of the problems with the strategy, if you were going to do this and then try and walk up the field, is that I think the refs like run you a disc, or there's like a bunch of discs on the sideline. So you might have to kind of jog. In club Frisbee, though, the beauty of this strategy is you take that Frisbee and you just chuck it into like a forest next to the field. And like, the first time you do it, the other team is like, what the heck? Then the second time you do it, they're just like, are you serious? And then the third time, they are so on tilt by the fact that you're just taking the Frisbee. And like, there's this one field I can think of in particular where like it's next to, like a babbling brook or something like that. And I just
get it right in the stream.
I have this dream of like one day coaching a team and play against Rhino or Sockeye or something, and just start throwing the Frisbee. Which is why. And I don't know.
It's a mental game too.
It is a mental game.
That's what I'm saying. Like, imagine you're playing against this, and these people are just like throwing the disc into the parking lot.
And then to
And
top it
walking
off, you start giving them the 20-second countdown.
Yeah.
Let them know they only got 20. Now they're the ones fucking running. Yeah, now who's running? You better get your ass that fucking disc. That always pissed me off too. I don't know if that pisses anyone else off, but like when you're in an observed game and they throw the disc out into fucking Timbuktu and the observer's like 20, I'm like, they just fucking like I mean, that always
Why are you rewarding this?
right.
Yeah.
But I think this is a super interesting strategy. I'm kind of
Dwight Schrute, if anybody watches The Office, when they're playing volleyball and Pam gets hurt and he just boots the ball into the woods and goes, "I'll get it," and then just starts moseying, like walking as slow as he can to get the ball because Pam's hurt.
This happened to us last weekend too, because there were 2 roller poles out. It wasn't super far out of bounds though, but maybe like 20 yards, 25 yards. And you can almost see me on film apologizing to Danny. I'm like, "Oh, sorry, Danny, I should have saved your legs there," because you see him like jogging, 25 yards out of bounds, and then 25 yards back, and then 20 yards up to the brick mark. That's more mileage that doesn't need to be
I'll
put
also
on his
say
body.
in the ADL, if to the point of not running a 70 when you're on offense, the time between points is so quick, and if you're on the O line and you're helping, like talking to your D line in any capacity, you have to basically run a 70 back to the line at like 60 or 70%, like every point. It drives me crazy, but
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned that. I was talking to some ADL friends a couple days ago, and we were talking about like line callings for the Cascades, because they've gone through like a series of different strategies for like, do they have an O1 and O2, or do they have like 3 different lines, or do they have all sorts of things? And like one of the low key things that I don't think people realize until you play in one of these games is that if your O line gets broken, you have to run down back to the opposite end zone and be like ready to raise. And the limited amount of time there is, I mean, that alone I feel like almost makes it a different sport in a sense. Like you like just line calling strategy. Like Mikey, I'm curious, I don't know if you can go into summit secrets, but like how you guys deal with that, because it seems like devastatingly hard.
Yeah, I mean, you could watch a game. It's not that much of a secret. we have a hybrid line, so like it's very likely Quinn and Kins are gonna have to bust their ass back if they're playing.
When we were playing against Chicago, when we were getting our shit kicked against Chicago in the semifinal of ADL last year, Nut would call all of our plays every single time. I was like our backup guy, but I never did it because Nut would just always do it. And I think he had just played like a D zone point, and then we played O, and I think we turned it over like 3 times, and we were all just absolutely smoked, tired. He happened to be like the farthest in the end zone, like the guy that got scored on or something. He had to sprint back. He was so tired by the time he got back to the line. He was trying to call the play, and he was so out of breath that he couldn't. And I had to call my first play of the year in the semifinal.
Not ideal. We need to have more backup plans is the moral of the story.
That's why I like having, an alternate group to come on if you do get broken. But now, I mean, what we were talking about earlier, that the players who are going to play a lot of minutes in the postseason got to play a lot of minutes in the games that they're playing. Like, fuck, it's going to be hard to get me off the field, I guess, for that reason. Because I'm going to just hit you with the stats. Like, you can't even argue at that point. Like, I'm just going to give you the data.
We'll get your turns, and we'll get you off the field.
We got culture to think about.
The numbers never lie. Fuck the culture. Culture's bullshit. Culture's like fake, like bullshit. Nah, you're not gonna cut me off on this tangent. Like culture's like fake Frisbee lore. Like, you know what? This is a great point. You want to know like culture, like
what just happened to Chill Kins?
Fuck Chill Kins. No, this is data driven Kins. Fuck Chill Kins. Think about like, I love how in Ultimate it was like for so long growing up, it was like even if you're on the like O-line, like you got to be up on the sideline. You got to be like cheering on your team. We're just talking about how tournaments are terrible for your body, right? But like, don't sit down in between fucking points. Like, get your ass on the sideline, stand up, run your ass down the field, like yell at the team. All of a sudden, Browns at Nationals, like sitting under the tent in the shade with like drinking water. And everyone's like, oh, that's a fucking great idea. Like, it's fucking ridiculous. And it's such a thing in Ultimate that it's like, you're gonna work harder. You're gonna outrun it. You're gonna in such good shape. Like fucking ridiculous shit, man. Like I don't care if you're that O-line player that's like up on the sideline yelling. Like I will sit down on the cooler, drink my pickle juice, maybe like talk some shit about what the point that just happened. Like fuck it.
This is why we're friends, Kins.
So back in my day at like college nationals, I can't remember what year it was. It was one of the years where Florida was relying on a very small set of players, which is a lot of Florida history. At this particular time, it was Cole Sullivan's reign, and he played basically every point. But when he wouldn't play, he had like his own tent set up with like misters and oxygen and like all of this
oxygen
stuff. And like when he wasn't on so this was the Nationals in Boulder, and so like I think I'm pretty sure, maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on this, I swear he was like sucking oxygen on the sideline, but he had this whole tent set up, and I think it even had like a little sign on it that said like the troll cave. And it was just like he was either on the field doing everything, or he was like in the little cave being like shaded and watered and like sucking oxygen.
The hyperbaric chamber.
Yeah, basically. And like any semblance of like you were saying, Kins, like being there and like cheering on your teammates, it was like, no, it was like when he goes off the field, he needs to go into this chamber and like revitalize himself and then go back out there.
He's got 3 teammates to fan him and missed him.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you're weighing is like the value of talking to your teammates and the value of not standing for 2 days in a row while also playing 7 games.
Yeah.
And if it makes you feel any better, again, this is like one of those other parallels back to the NBA, which is that, in Frisbee, we have all this stuff where it's like, like we know this stuff is maybe kind of not the most important, but, like how much do we weigh athletic performance versus culture, and all this stuff. And like same thing in basketball. I mean, I work in the analytics group, and our job is to tell coaches, etc., like what the numbers say. And oftentimes like the numbers say, these players that are culturally very important to the team, like we don't think they should play, or we don't think they should have the ball in their hands. And we are saying that not because we think that's what the coaches should do, but we're telling them that like that's what the numbers say. And there are basketball people and there are coaches that are providing another input, which is like, this guy is the heart and soul of the team. Like we cannot, like, they are human beings. They are not perfect machines at this point. And so, there are several inputs into the system. One is the numbers. One is the, whoever has their finger on the pulse of the team. And then it is definitely an art form to like combine those two. And I think having a coach that kind of understands like, what the right thing is, both like from like, intellectually, and what the right thing is like emotionally, and being able to get those things to like work together is an art.
It is.
This also got me thinking, so like the nutrition that it would take to like be fully hydrated and fully replenished for a tournament. There was this like the best marathoner in the world, Eliud Kipchoge, and they ran like a controlled.
Love that guy.
Yeah, he's sick. And they ran like a controlled marathon for him to like break 2. And I think he ran like a 1:58 or something like that. But they had scientists like studying what he lost and how he needs to replenish it and what's the most efficient way to replenish it for the marathon. I'm really curious like what it would look like for Frisbee, because for me, it feels impossible to get the proper nutrients while I'm playing or even after I'm done on Saturday. Like it feels impossible to be fully replenished, and I'd be so curious to see.
Yeah, because tournaments are savage and need to be banned. They're terrible. There's no scientific way to make this possible.
They're so fun.
Oh yeah, they're a lot of fun.
Yeah, Yeah. Okay, we're kind of up against the clock, so maybe we'll ask a couple more questions. I'd love to ask like some fun NBA questions too that hopefully you can answer. Gosh, my brain is spacing though. I had a thought about Kipchoge. I tried to run his marathon
How long did
pace
you get?
on a treadmill. I cannot remember if I even made
Dude,
it a minute.
It's a sprint.
I'm yeah.
How fast is
Like
it?
I think it's like 4.5
It's around there.
minutes
It's fucking
per
insane.
mile
It's
for a
absolutely fucking
marathon.
insane.
How many miles per hour is that?
It's like 14 or 15 miles per hour, I'm pretty sure.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's like most treadmills don't go fast enough is what I've seen from people trying to do that. They have to max out the treadmill and it's still not quite fast enough.
It might have been under 14. I can't remember now, but yeah. That's anyway, insane. So Chris, I want maybe one more Frisbee question, and then I'd love to ask him NBA question, and I'd also love to know who can deadlift more between you and Quinn.
And me, dude. What are you fucking talking about?
We can get kids
sorry.
in there.
Of the four of us who can deadlift. All right. So my question is about spacing. Maybe we don't have enough data on this, but all other sports are like basketball, right? It's all about spacing. But a lot of that is predicated on having shooting on the floor too, right? Like you can't really space the floor if you have, I don't know, I'm blanking on a bad 3-point shooter, but you can imagine
Jokic,
Westbrook, Westbrook.
Embiid is a great 3-point shooter.
Well, we don't need to get into the stats, but what do you think about that for ultimate? Like, does it make sense that we have like a person behind the disc or even with the disc? Like, why is everybody ahead of the line of scrimmage? Have you thought about that at all? Is there an answer?
So to touch on some of this and kind of go back to crazy idea corner. I mean, if you think about, ideally you'd want the most space possible, which would probably, if you were thinking about it, like trying to play 2v2 on a full 7 field would be really hard for the defense. And I feel like one of the sort of things that you're taught when at least when I was coming up in Frisbee, is like when you're trailing the play, like you bust your butt to get back in the play.
Don't do that.
And it's like, why? Well, it doesn't make any sense. If your defender is running back, sure. But if you can get your defender out of the play, you don't want to be anywhere near the play.
Yeah.
And that was something we actively coached on ECU, at least last season and maybe the season before, which is, I can't remember what we called it or sort of how we cued it, but it was like, basically don't rush into the play. Like it's okay to trail. And the idea, like you were getting at, is trying to make the field as big as possible by removing players. And it's why I always thought it was interesting. So like Boston teams back in the day used to do this thing where they would play no dumps back and put everyone downfield. And it was considered, I'm not like a historian of Boston Ultimate, but I remember it was like, hey,
there were Ulti-World articles about it,
Yeah, and like how advantageous it is because then you have, you're never throwing anything backwards and you're always moving forwards and something.
But you're really just throwing to a crowd of people all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think, the more that I've thought about like Frisbee and like kind of offensive strategies, and sort of as it relates to basketball as well, is like the name of the game is basically always trying to open up a space that wasn't previously open and then like throw the disc there. Because if the space is open for a long period of time, you have poachers kind of like the defense is aware that space is dangerous. And the longer the defense is aware the space is dangerous, you got handler sags coming in, you've got people poaching deep, you got people poaching under. But like the most devastating thing is when a space has a lot of stuff going on and then is totally vacated and a timed cut is going through there. That's like the golden thing that you can get to. And I don't know exactly the best way to coach that. There are definitely systems I think people have tried to put in place to sort of create those opportunities.
We even use that word that you mentioned, trail. We're trying to do that more and more, trail the play.
Yeah. And and I think kind of going along with that, you're saying, in basketball, like people that have gravity or kind of like, make you respect uh certain things. It's I think in Frisbee we sort of have two ways that you can create gravity, both like lethal cutters and lethal like big throwers. And so, like if you have somebody with the disc, that everyone knows can bomb it, suddenly downfield, like I know when I'm playing defense on someone and I turn around, I see like Nut has the disc or something, I'm backing that person. Like
Yep.
there's no chance that I'm playing it, because I know
Yep.
if he
Yep.
gets any daylight, that throw is going. And then, conversely, I know that unless I'm guarding some other world class player, the player that I'm guarding, if they get the disc, like whatever, it's not their main kind of like offensive quarterback. And inversely downfield, if you're on a super cutter, you're backing them, and again, like just by their physical ability, they're able to create like huge spaces for throwers to get the ball into. And so I think the concepts are definitely like extremely applicable and parallel each other.
Yeah, and the cutter piece, I wonder if it's the skill set of the cutter, or if it's, or I don't think it's always the athleticism of the cutter, but just like how well they time it and how well they position and then create and use space. I'm thinking of just this past weekend, like a lot of our younger players would start their cut so close to the sideline when the disc was already on the sideline. Just basically not giving them a big lane to attack.
You have in here what matters more, speed or
Mm-hmm.
size, and I'm really
Mm-hmm.
curious as to if Chris has any data on that and is allowed to, because I know the Celtics are like this secret organization that have all this important information about basketball and that kind of stuff. But, just if you could touch on that at all.
Yeah, so I assume we're talking about this in terms of basketball and not ultimate.
But
Let's
hear
maybe,
both.
maybe, I mean, I guess, you talk about it in terms of basketball and then we could hypothesize on whether or not it's similar in
Yeah.
ultimate.
So I think basketball has one thing going for it, which is that uh, the the hoop is 10 feet tall,
Sure.
and so the closer you are to the size of the basket is generally a good thing. And I think, without going into like what specific things the Celtics have determined is useful, I think, an interesting exercise is like picking your favorite website that does kind of advanced analytics for basketball, whether or not that's 538 has something called Raptor, which is their sort of impact metric, or
Mhm.
this thing called dunksandthrees.com has this thing called EPM, or ESPN has player efficiency rating, Basketball Reference has box plus minus. All of these things tend to favor tall
Mm.
players, and many people will argue that it is a bias towards tall players. Uh, However, I would argue that they're numbers that have just modeled what has led to winning and scoring more points than the other team. So it seems to suggest that being tall is very useful, or that tall players seem to have more impact on winning basketball. Not necessarily that they're better players, but that being
Yeah,
tall is good for
yeah,
basketball.
yeah, and that doesn't really translate very well to ultimate, huh? With the 10-foot high basket.
Yeah, so because of that, I would lean, again, this would be just totally hypothesizing. I think speed is more important. However, I actually think probably quickness is probably more important than either of
Yes.
those.
Mm.
Uh, and I guess my reason would be like, it is very rare that you actually get up to a full sprint in
Mm.
Frisbee. I mean, you'd have to be making a real long cut. And to be honest, like long cuts that don't change directions are, at least from a defensive perspective, probably the easier thing to stop, right? Like if somebody makes a huge cut and they're actually gaining separation from you, it means their cut is probably way too deep to even be viable at that point, or they started it from so shallow that you can like call a switch or something like that and kind of get someone to help you out. But people that are super quick are just, I mean, they're unstoppable in end zone sets. They're unstoppable whenever they try and like break down a cut. Like, and again, there's probably some personal bias here in that I was like decently fast straight line, but was not super quick. And my entire career, the hardest thing I found is that like if I'm playing somebody that is super quick, it is impossible to stop them no matter what I try.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always found that those guys to be the most.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like the smaller guys in Seattle like Quan had a ton of success. That he's still having success.
Kinda.
Is Janin he's a speed and quick guy, right?
There's a lot of debate about Janet. So he was very fast and very quick. I'm trying to remember if I had to pick if he was quick or fast. There's depending on who you talk to, people have vastly different opinions of this. But he was definitely both.
A polarizing figure in the Seattle community.
Yeah,
interesting.
Speaking of polarizing community, Seattle players, Tony also small and quick.
He's quick. I wouldn't say. I don't know if he's fast. I don't know if I've ever seen him run full speed.
Definitely quick. Definitely polarizing. How about that?
Definitely polarizing.
Definitely quick. I'll say. Yeah.
But going back to the whole size versus speed thing. I think basketball might be the only one that I would lean and say size. Even in like the
football.
No, I would say in football. Okay, like skill positions.
Sure.
Like one of the best receivers of all time, Antonio Brown, was like 5'10". Like a lot of the good Devontae Adams is 6 feet, maybe 6'1". Who's another good receiver?
So what about like volleyball?
Who? Yeah, volleyball.
Okay, fair enough. Height.
But again, you have to pick sports where like part of the game environment is set at a.
They're also not running
Yeah.
in more than a couple feet in volleyball, I feel like. But
so maybe if it's not windy, it's a little better to be tall because you can just lob some shit up there and the tall person can be tall. But especially when it's windy and it becomes a more small-sided game, the most
goals in an ABL season was by Freystadter, and he was like 6'9", I think. So.
Oh, Freystadter,
it was back when the season was 16 games. He had like 95 goals or something insane.
Huge.
Another Seattle guy, Ray Ilian, his dad. Have you met his dad, Chris? Paul?
Yeah.
Paul has I've talked to him a decent amount because Ray played with Encore at Masters Worlds in like 2018. And so Paul was there, and he has this, he's very much, he has a theory that like roles really matter, and he thinks that handlers specifically should be tall. And one reason is because you can just like throw a reset up to them and they can come down with it.
So I guess I have a comment about that, which is I think all the players should be tall and they should all be fast.
Okay, you're probably right.
That's
there.
a really
they
good
should all
point.
be Calvin Johnson.
Okay. Data.
Right, so related to this, one like hypothetical that we were discussing the other day was like let's imagine a world where like Giannis and all these guys that are star athletes in other sports all play Frisbee. Like, how do you think Frisbee would change? And I'm curious what you all think, because I have a very specific opinion that I think would happen, but I don't want to influence you.
Like would there be more like sky balls sent up? Like how the style would change?
Anything about the way Frisbee is played do you think would drastically change? Again, if you just dropped in and they were all playing Frisbee all the time.
Yeah.
So like,
they can throw and they can whatever. They're like high elite level players.
With the field size as it is, it doesn't seem to make sense to play person on a club field if they're that big. At least not as the field would be much smaller for them.
They don't necessarily just have to be big though. Like they could also just be super fast or super quick. Like you could just get some like running back, wide receiver types out there who are just ridiculously shifty. Like it'd probably be a mix.
I'm curious who would be the best player. Would it be someone like LeBron who's 6'8" and very athletic but not as fast as like someone like Antonio Brown or someone like that? It's very interesting who would be the touted players.
Or would it be like soccer players? Would they translate better? I've had this conversation a million times. The only thing that I know for certain is that we would all be obsolete.
Yes.
Well,
true.
Yes, that is certainly true. My theory on this is I think everyone would just throw hammers. I think hammers would be the only throw.
Just
And-
playing football.
Basically, yeah. I mean, so like, because you can't, like, especially if you were tall, you could just hammer it over people. But also, it would destroy like the entire, like, so much of Frisbee's been built up about like a break side and a fore side, whatever. But if you just never learn to throw a flick or a backhand and only ever threw over the top, you can launch those things and you can basically just put them anywhere on the field.
You got this from
Can
Jim,
you
didn't you?
imagine?
This is Jim. This is literally Jim.
As soon as the wind picks
I
up,
am
they're
so against this take. I just do not see hammers being the only throw.
Well, you've only seen like uncoordinated, unathletic, like us play Frisbee. It's like these guys they're so like,
But what if you want to like float it out to space?
you just hit people in stride. Everything's in stride. People are just throwing blades.
dead. What if the wind is above 15 miles an hour?
Well, so then I guess this is the other side of it, which is that I think if this ever happened, it would be, I think Frisbee would probably become an indoor sport. Like, I think they would do fields inside to eliminate the wind, because basically the idea that you could just have a game that becomes completely unwatchable, I think, is probably totally
yeah, I
untenable.
kind of want. Do you think that's true even now?
It's one of those things where I think that it's like one of the, I always think that, it's one of the charms of it. And then you watch like just a god awful windy game, or like a game that needs to, like, it ends at 3-4, and you're like, yeah, this would never be a sport.
Yeah.
We can't have this.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the outdoors. Like it to me, I would not enjoy it if it was indoors, at least from our perspective.
That's like the Frisbee player view, though. Like, we're all like, oh,
Yeah.
like it's part of it, and it's great because now some people can throw and others aren't going to be throwing as much, or throwing like hucks or breaks or anything like that. But from an outside perspective, I would say that, like, if you're not a Frisbee player, you probably want it to be indoors 24/7. Yeah.
Sweeter throws. Yeah.
I mean, if it's in a big stadium, like how windy does it get in like a football stadium? That's still open.
Still pretty
but
windy. I would argue
get
that's
pretty
even
windy.
worse. Like, the wind swirls.
even
then,
like
that's just impossible.
the Seattle Stadium
It's
Memorial.
awful. It's the
Memorial,
worst.
right?
Oh,
well,
yeah.
yeah, but
I mean,
I'm
you know
talking about
that,
like
Chris.
a fully enclosed, like open venue.
It's just like you watch like Bills games, like Buffalo Bills games. Like, Josh Allen can't even throw the ball when it's that windy, and he's got the strongest arm in the league.
But then that's an interesting point, because football does it, and football plays where it can snow or it can
Yeah, but
rain.
they can run the ball.
They can-
It still gets fucking ugly. Like, it still drastically changes the
And I'm
game.
sure the viewership is terrible on those games.
I don't know. Probably not.
Did any of you watch what was it, College Nationals 2011, when Wisconsin
Definitely
played
That
Carleton?
not.
Feldman had 44 turnovers in one game or something.
I think like 94. I think each team,
What was that? Really?
they like the periphery, like structures and stuff, were blowing over, and I think
A speaker blew off of its stand and landed on a lady's head.
yeah, like it was more wind than you can possibly imagine. It was completely unplayable, and
why Nationals will never be here again.
yeah, it was gone.
I do think indoor ultimate would be sick, because skying people and stuff is so much better in indoor,
Mhm.
because you can just read the disc
Oh,
so
yeah,
much
true.
easier. Like, honestly, I don't know. We were just talking about how like throwing in the wind is beautiful, and so to a certain extent, I like a little bit of wind. I think is fine and a great part of the game. And maybe you just like blow a draft into like an indoor stadium, and like you keep it, like you'd mix it up,
Controlled.
because otherwise, like, it would be like, I don't know, but it is cool. Like, there are a lot of pros of indoor, like the exciting factor of like deep balls and stuff. I mean, become really, really
Defense is hard
intense.
enough. Indoor would just make it that much harder. Like, that would be brutal. If you're a D-line player, you're rolling over in your grave right now.
Right? Because you're just
Spectators
right.
are here for offense anyway.
Right. So
Yeah,
fuck them.
Yeah, there you go.
That's, again, to parallel to basketball. I mean, we do all this stuff to like try and win a championship. And then, when it comes to, for example, resting players, we are highly incentivized to rest players because we think it will be useful to winning. But, the league, which is trying to sell an entertainment product, is not. And so, like, thinking about, again, like something like Frisbee, it's like, it's when you think about if Frisbee was ever going to go past what it currently is, it needs to be something that people enjoy watching and not just something people enjoy playing.
Yeah, definitely.
And so it's tricky, but I'm so convinced it'll just be hammers. Everyone just hammering things everywhere.
I'm so not convinced of that take. It's unbelievable.
We need an experimental game.
Maybe if it was inside too. I mean, I could see ripping so many hammers.
If it was inside, 100%.
But what if there's like a big person you want to like lob it up to? Like we're just throwing a hammer
really high.
Hammers can float a little bit. Also, like
they're harder to catch. Like they're harder to sky someone.
But again, imagine people only ever played throwing hammers. They would all be so used to catching hammers. They would have no.
But yeah,
okay,
imagine.
I'm trying to expand my mind to this idea. I think there would be. I definitely think more hammers, sure, but there has to be utility for like a floaty pass, or like like give
floaty passes with all these athletes.
What about give goes? What about a fucking give and go that's like 2 yards? I'm just my touch hammer has gotten really good because I can throw it like a yard and just.
Todd is known for throwing the hammer swing. He's actually.
I mean, it's all these Bravo guys and their hammer fetishes. Honestly, it's a fetish.
Jim.
It's a fetish.
Jim.
It's a fetish.
We had a practice that Jim had us throwing hammers to unders in the vert stack to the break side. He's like,
so this is where Chris got it from.
Just throw a hammer. I'm like, I'm not throwing a hammer to an under.
This opened the possibilities for Chris of like, wow, what if we were only throwing?
You want to hear some crazy gym strategies? You got to look at talk to someone that played in 2010 when they were running like the Y stack.
The Y stack.
You know about the Y stack?
No,
never heard of it.
Do not know about the Y stack.
You got to look into the Y stack.
I want to hear about the Y stack.
It was actually, now that I think about it, it is sort of. It might be sort of similar to some stuff that Saka is actually doing nowadays.
Is it
hard to describe?
That makes sense, actually.
It was basically like you sort of had you had a vertical stack, and then you sort of had 2 deep people that were sort of on the corners, and you basically ran a dominator with the people in the vert stack, and then tried to, if one of them got it, you tried to break it to one of those people, and then they would just look to boost it to the tips of the Y.
Oh my God, it's the 4-1-2.
Yeah.
Or was it the Y because everyone like during the everyone like while they were playing it would be like why?
Look, I don't know what to tell you. It was wild to see that at the time. It was somebody again with a better historical knowledge of this can tell you what was going on, but at the time it seemed like it was all just being made up on the fly, and just like we were just seeing an offense just birthed and experimented on.
Jim's an artist. He's an artist.
Truly is.
All right. Couple more questions. First, one more NBA question. That is, do you have what's your favorite NBA story that you can share with us?
That I can share. Man. Okay,
or like interaction with the player or something like that.
So I'll share. Well, okay, 2 things. One, I think one of the coolest things that happened was I was in Vegas last year for Summer League, and they everyone is staying basically at the same 2 or 3 hotels. Like everybody that's either on teams, associated with teams, whatever. And I hadn't really seen any players other than Celtics players that I knew from hanging out at the practice facility. And I just show up there and I realized that there are just NBA players everywhere. And a couple of them, the first couple I saw this guy Julius Randle who plays for the Knicks, and I was like, he kind of looks smaller in person than I was expecting. That was a little surprising.
Really?
Yeah. Then the elevator opens up and this giant walks out of the elevator, and it is Paolo Banchero, the number 1 pick in the draft. And at the time,
Yeah.
people were like, like, was he the right pick? Should have been Jabari? Should have been Chet? And I was like, I don't know anything about these other guys. This guy is like at least 7'2" and just ginormous. He was the
What?
biggest
He's not
person
that
I
tall, though,
saw
is he?
there. What?
Is he really that tall? He's not
He
that
is
tall.
huge. He is so ginormous in person that it is like whatever his like.
And he's like 20, 19?
Yeah, and he was so young, and I remember this like stuck with me. Like it was so I hit up like our NBA Slack channel in the ECU Slack, and I was like, buy all the Banchero stock you can. This guy is a mountain of a man. And then sure enough, like if you ever watch any of his like early games, the first time like opposing announcers like see him, they just can't stop talking about how giant he is. He is seriously
He's a specimen.
6'10", 250 is what they have him listed as.
So I think the 6'10" is a lie. I'm convinced he is 7 feet tall. He is huge.
That's so
I
interesting.
mean, KD lists himself under 7'2" or
Yeah.
under 7 feet.
Yeah, so all these people lie about like weights and heights, and
I
like
don't understand that.
I mean, some people intentionally lie and some people unintentionally lie. So I don't know what's going on there. So that was kind of one of the first things that I thought was kind of cool, or just like the first moment where I was just like, one of the things we talk about all the time is like, do you need to see people in person, or can you like scout from over the TV, or like, can the numbers tell you everything? And it was like the day that I saw Paolo step out of that elevator, I was like, you have to see people in person. Like this is
It's
this
crazy.
guy is a Greek
I
god.
agree. If you go to an NHL game and you sit, like in the second row, the third, like you're way back there, you can't tell how big these guys are. But if you sit on the glass or a couple seats up, these guys on the ice, like they don't look human almost. It's like, how can I get a shred of that genetic, like just insaneness? Like,
Yes. And so kind of going off this, one of the first days, so when I go to Boston and like actually do my job in person, the office, quote unquote, is at the Celtics practice facility, which is not at TD Garden. It's like, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes away or something like that. But so we basically got this like giant basketball gym and then some like offices and weight rooms and all that stuff. So one of the first days to go out there, I was like, oh, I'll get like a little lift in after work. And so I go and I was trying to find like the like pull-up bars, and I was like over by the squat racks, and I was like, they should be around here somewhere. And then I realized that I needed to look like 2 feet up, and the pull-up bars were so tall. And I was like looking at that, and I was like, man, to think that, and like there was like the short pull-up bar and the tall pull-up bar, and the short pull-up bar was just so tall.
That's hilarious. Yeah, it's like a different species.
seriously.
Yeah. So anytime anybody like, I don't know, goes on the internet and says so and so pro whatever sports players wouldn't be able to beat Frisbee players, you should always bet on the pro athletes. It's like we're not talking about like, we're talking about different species, and it's not a contest.
Do you think they would they need any training or immediately beat a team?
I mean, it's like it always is. Like they need at least one of them to get to a level of throwing ability where they can complete passes. But I think at that point they would, yeah, I think it's on the order of months. If no one has any throwing ability, you give them a couple months and they'll figure it out. Because the other thing that like I think we take for granted is like when I learned to throw a flick, it must have taken me like a year to throw like a decent flick. And you hang around like some of these guys, like they're not only extremely good, like Jokic is a perfect example of this. His best physical ability is actually that his hands are amazing. His hand-eye coordination is off the charts. And sure enough, like at the office, I can't remember what we were talking about, but it was like, yeah, like you can't, if you like pick a game and challenge these guys to it, like table tennis, foosball, like anything you can think of, they will be experts at it, like in very short order.
Right
Like,
away.
They are both not only the product of like amazing like physical attributes in like their height, weight, speed, but they are also the cross selected for like premium, like supreme hand-eye coordination. It's like it's not an accident that Steph Curry is an amazing golfer. Like
yeah.
like they are very talented.
Pat Mahomes also.
Yeah, in every axis of athleticism. And so like their ability to like pick this stuff up, I would not doubt, unless it's like Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert, I think, would never be good.
Oh, my T-Wolves. They're my second team. Sweet. Well, yeah. Thanks for all that insight. It's I could
it's
continue asking about
fascinating.
pro sports all the time because like I would love to dive into training and like how the athletes train too, but we've been on here for almost 2 hours, so I feel like it'd be a good time to wrap up.
But we can, there's always room for another pod one
Mm,
day down the
mhm.
line.
Yeah, sneak your way into their gym facilities. Try to get a hold of some of their trainers. I'd love to know what they're doing. And
you could probably just get Gabe on the pod, and Gabe will tell you everything you need to know about.
Yeah, that's
training.
true. Gabe Stump,
he's
trainer of the stars.
A lot more interesting stories about training people.
Training Matt Damon. He's also training who else? Gerard Butler, I think. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Dude,
That's so interesting.
I don't know how many of those stories you can put on the pod and how many you're gonna have to cut though. You might need
Gabe. Yeah. Yeah, he probably has some juicy details. Okay.
That could blow the pod up.
Good.
Chris, what are you deadlifting these days?
Man, it's funny. So after we talked, so I have not actually been lifting much recently, which is a sad admission. But the other day I went and did some trap bar deadlifts after we spoke, and I wasn't going too hard, but we were in the low 300s. But
give me your PR range though.
Okay, so like I was telling you, me and my friend, when Frisbee was canceled in 2020, we decided to power lift for the summer and just like see what we could do. And so the numbers that we got up to, I might be off by like 10 pounds or so on all these lifts, but bench was like 245, squat was like 330, deadlift was like 440, something like that. Straight bar, but with a belt and straps. And then because I was a masochist, so at that point I weighed just about 200 pounds because of all the powerlifting.
Yeah.
And then I decided to immediately see if I could run a 5-minute mile at 200 pounds. And
that's hard.
So I got to I trained for 3 weeks and I think I got a 508,
That's
507 at 200 pounds, which was exciting, but it didn't quite get there.
Quinn, what's your straight bar at?
I haven't straight barred since probably sophomore year of college, but my best straight bar ever was 435. Yeah,
right around there.
But
damn, dude, I can't even get that off the ground. I swear to God, I can get to like 370. It feels kind of easy, and then I put one more pound on it, and I can't move it.
You gotta just get heavy.
It's true.
I'm cutting right now.
Well,
I've lost to like 12 pounds in the last month.
Cutting is soft.
Kins, you can't cut or bulk. You just you don't.
He's up to 185.
No, 190. I'm 190.
6'6".
6'4". I'm like Paolo.
I don't know about that.
Wait till you see me in person, Chris. It's just one of those things,
Yeah, you gotta see
it. It's a big 6'4", 190.
Tall 6'4". Okay, noted.
Wait till I put my cleats on, bro. Shit is different.
Just going up against Paolo. Can you imagine?
And Paolo's the one who loses like 10 pounds a game, isn't it?
In sweat, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but it sounds like a thing that could happen. Sure.
It was so big.
Yeah, that is wild. I mean, it makes sense. And yeah, that's awesome. Wow.
Quinn, what are you benching? 255?
255 is my all-time best. I think that was during COVID, when I was lifting a shit ton.
Yeah.
I could probably get like 225, 235 right now. I'm not in the bench as much these days, but
how about your
trap bar?
You going for 500 this year?
I got 485 once, and then I failed 495, and I haven't done it heavy since because I was so distraught.
So I got a problem, which is that my trap bar, the like things that you load the weight onto for
It's
whatever
too
reason,
small.
they're too
The collars?
small, and so it maxes out at like 315 if I
You
put all the
need
plates
the
on there.
you either need the 55-pound plates or the Rogue trap bar that's like extendo.
You got to buy the
yeah,
rep,
Rep
the rep
Fitness
one. They're
one,
based out of Denver. Based out of
Oh
Denver.
yeah, actually, I have some plates from there because a friend of mine ordered a bunch of stuff from there a while ago, and he was like, "Hey, I got all my weights from Rep Fitness in Colorado, Chris."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Why?"
Yeah. They actually don't ship from here though. They're like their two warehouses are one's in Pennsylvania and one's in California, I think, because it costs too much money to ship
Jesus.
from the center of the country.
Makes sense. Huh.
We got the Todd sighting as we wrap up here. That's a good cue to thank Chris for joining us. Stick around, Chris, though, for a few minutes as we wrap up. I will see you, Quinn. See you, Kins, very soon. Chris, again, thanks for joining. It's super, super nice to have you on and get a little insight on what real sports are like.
Break that podcast virginity. Yeah, thank you, Chris. This was fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, guys.
Bye.
Peace out.